So now that we got a basic introduction to what coroutines are, it's time for us to learn what are the different threads that we can run coroutines on. So let's get started in Android Studio. In here, I'm going to start a new application. I'm going to call it coroutine threads. And here we're going to have a look at what are those different threads. Before that, just keep in mind that for every coroutine application that we do from here and everything that you do, you must add the right dependencies here to your build grader app module level. And for that, I've actually copied both of these for myself. And every time we come in here, I'm just going to copy these two implementations or these two dependencies rather, and I'm going to sync my grader. So the same thing that we did in our previous lesson, we're just going to keep doing it every time, but I'm going to keep myself these two in a text editor, so I don't need to every time go online and find the right ones. So here I have these two, and now let's head into my main activity. So as we saw earlier, I could, for instance, go ahead and say coroutine scope. And then in the scope, I could actually choose the type of thread that I want to use. These threads are basically, there are 4 types of them, but we usually only use 2 of them. The types are these: dispatchers, you could use IO, you could use main, you could use unconfined, and you could use default. Now let's see what's the difference between all of these. So I'm going to write the 2 that we usually use, IO, and then I'm going to say launch. And then within the launch, you obviously do whatever you want to be doing. So everything that should happen somewhere in the background, you do it in the IO. So I'm going to write in here background thread, which basically is if you want to communicate with your backend, if you want to do some heavy calculations, you do all of those in your background thread. Then the next thread is basically your main thread. I'm going to actually copy all of this. Obviously for now I'm not really writing anything in the body of the coroutine. This is just an introduction to what those threads actually are. The next one is main, which is basically your UI thread. So the UI thread is the thread that you run everything that the user has to interact with them, whether that is updating something on the interface, whether that is making a button enabled, whether that is showing some images, everything that has to happen on the user interface. We also have 2 other dispatchers, which is unconfined and default. Both of them, you don't really end up using them as often. Unconfined is basically when you are within a suspending function, and default is for very, very CPU intensive processes. By the time you need to use those, you will definitely be able to determine which one of them you would need. However, there's another thing that I want to show you in here, which is what if I'm running some sort of a background thread, and then within that background thread, I need to access something on the UI. And that's basically called switching the context. So you could actually be within a dispatcher's IO, within your background thread, and then wanting to change something on your UI. And if that's the case, within the body of your coroutine, you will do this. You will say with context, which means right now, while I am in here, I want to actually change the context. And that is by saying dispatchers.main. And then you're going to go ahead and say within here, I want to actually do something, which simply says while I am within one of these contexts, I want to switch the context to another one, do something, and then continue doing whatever I have to be doing. Let's say, for instance, you are reading a bunch of images that are really large, and you are reading them from some online resource. And then every time that one of them gets fetched, you want to show that one image in here and then wait for the next one to show up. And that could be an approach for having a for loop that as it goes through and reads the different images from your backend, whichever it finds, you end up showing it, and then we will continue the same loop in here. So that's about it for this lesson. Just a quick introduction to what are the 2 main coroutine scopes that we use, or the main threads that we use. We use IO for background stuff, and we use main whenever we want to be doing something in the UI.